Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio, Paes.
And today we have a special guest. We're talking with Eric Severson, who is a social 3. Thanks for being here, Eric.
Thanks, Pete. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Eric. I know this talk will be super interesting, both to know your personal journey and your professional applications of the Enneagram.
And I'm really glad to meet you and to have you here. Heard great things about you and your work. And also, I was telling you before we started, I don't think we've interviewed a social 3. So it's really nice to have you here for many, many different reasons. And we're looking forward to hearing about all of what you've done with the Enneagram. But first, I'd love to start with you. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your own background, what you do, where you are, things like that?
I'd be happy to. I grew up on a farm in northeastern Pennsylvania. My family raised pigs and horses. And I think this is probably where my foundation as a social 3 focused on doing tasks originated. And I grew up working on a horse farm in high school. And as I reflect back now, I can see that much of my environment sort of conditioned me as a social 3. So part of it was the emphasis, I think, on hard work and Protestant work ethic. And for me, where I got my validation, so as a kid, I was the one who got up at 5 a.m. to feed the horses, even when it was 0 degrees outside, and got up the school bus at the end of the day and cleaned horse stalls and the horse farm and that kind of thing. And as I reflected on it over time, I think that kind of an additional element was I grew up realizing at a pretty young age, I would say between 3 and 10, that I was gay. And at that time in the 1970s, like there were no role models anywhere. There was no one on TV, et cetera. And I remember sort of figuring it out one time, looking at my parents instead of these old encyclopedias they've been taught to buying that I use for book reports. I looked it up to say, like, what am I? I connect this to growing up as a social 3, as I was very aware, poignantly aware. I think anyone would be, but as a social subtype, I think I was particularly focused then on status and how people saw me. And in that particular case, hiding is
Mm.
part of myself. The second way I think it played in as a 3 is the way that I tried to make myself okay in the world was to be really good at certain things and to do tasks for other people to do work and excel,
Mhm.
compete and excel.
Mhm.
And I can look back on it now. At the time, of course, I didn't know that, but I can look back and see these things were quite formative. And while that's also contributed to my success in life in many ways, be able to persist through difficulties, to push through hard feelings and just do things that you need to do, it's also the reason I've had to do a lot of inner work in my adult life, therapy and other things,
Mhm.
to realize that I was fixated, right, on this survival approach. So when I left home, I was going to be a veterinarian, actually,
Mm.
until I interned at a vet's office, and it was turned out to be really bloody, and it's kind of sad. Brought their animals in to be put to sleep and things. And I switched to my second love, which was teaching or English. So I went to grad school at Arizona State and taught English when I was there, and ended up, because I couldn't figure out how to pay off my student loans with what I made teaching. I
Mm.
interviewed with the business majors for with MBAs for business programs and got accepted into a program at Macy's in 1992 and went through their executive development program. And from there, my career grew into operations and human resources. And I was moved to Gap later, became the chief HR officer at Gap, and then the chief people officer at DaVita, and then the chief people officer in Neiman Marcus Group. And as I reflect on all of this, a lot of it has to do with my basic drives as a three to achieve things. But along the way in the story, I think I also experienced what a lot of threes I work with in my practice now, as I'm now a consultant who uses the Enneagram with business clients mostly. I experienced what a lot of my clients experience at some point in their life, which is almost like a meltdown or a breakdown in 2004, when after I was almost 40 and after decades of working myself into the ground to achieve things, kind of too many things kind of converged at once. It was a perfect storm. I think I had a very difficult boss. It was difficult for me. So it kind of threatened my sense of myself
Mm.
as a three, as I identified with excelling at work. And my father got very invasive melanoma cancer. And then I got melanoma. And
Mm.
then my husband at 37 had a massive heart attack all at once.
Whoa.
And so finally, after years of pushing all my feelings about things down out of the way, which is what threes tend to do,
Mhm.
I went to therapy.
Mm.
And I went every week for 4 years and discovered much more effective methods for being able to express my feelings instead
Mm.
of bottling them up and pushing them down. And that's about the same time I discovered the Enneagram.
Mm. Mhm.
A coach at work who introduced me to the Enneagram. And it was a bit of an unlock for me personally, as complemented therapy in a beautiful way.
Mhm.
It really helped me to understand the underlying patterns in my personality
Mhm.
that I had the power to do something about.
Mhm.
And so I became a kind of obsessed with it over the last 22, 23 years, and have discovered that it's the most important tool I use now with my clients.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And was it easy for you to see yourself as a three in the system when you learned it? What was it like kind of recognizing your type?
Uh, I've tested with numerous instruments, including yours, 4 or 5 others, the Wisdom of the Enneagram, book version, where you just kind of take
Yeah.
manually on a page. I always test as a three. I always test when it's possible as a social three.
Mhm.
And in fact, on one of the assessments, I think out of a scale of 100, I test as a 98. So I'm pretty certain I'm a three. My reaction at first was yes, that
Mhm.
sounds like me, and I liked it and I identified with it. I liked it less when really started to investigate subtype. My subtype is often called prestige. Sort of winced at that. It
Mhm.
sounds shallow and superficial to me,
Mhm.
and I didn't like that. But I do think that part of the essence of understanding yourself as a social three has a lot to do with paying attention to the social instinct and to instinctual sequencing. And for me, I'm social dominant and self-preservation repressed.
Mhm.
And how this has shown up in even just the short part of my life I related to you was being unaware of what my body and my heart was telling me about limits.
Mhm.
Even today, because I'm turning 60 this year, and my body, the issues with my body have to do, it's very clear to me, with overuse and
Mhm.
overextension. It's mostly osteo issues, things of that nature. And I can look back in my life and say, my body tried to tell me multiple times, stop doing that, slow down.
Mm.
Other things that someone maybe with a self-preservation dominant instinct might pay a little more attention to, even as a three.
Mhm.
But I think you combine the three's drive to achieve things, to accomplish things, to compete with the social instinct, dominance, and self preservation, repression. And you get somebody who really has to teach himself to pay attention to what his body and his heart is telling him. And that's been my inner work.
Mm.
A lot of it has been over the years. I have a meditation practice, mindfulness practices of various sorts that I use daily to get in touch with the signals from my body and from my heart,
Mhm.
and to feel those things. And I think when I mentioned that meltdown in 2004, a big part of my recovery was learning then how to express emotions. I think I went years sometimes without ever
Mhm.
crying, which is very common, I notice, among my three clients.
Right.
And today, after many years of work, I can say proudly that I watch TV shows all the time. I start to tear up, and that never happened before. And I actually find that to be a triumph. And
Mhm.
I can feel the difference in my body, of course, as the cortisol is rolling out of the tears, etc. So I think for me, here's what I've discovered: that working in self development, instinctual sequencing, and maybe calibrating and balancing expression of the instincts is as much of a growth journey as
Mhm.
integrating the various parts of my core self in the Enneagram. And I think the self-preservation social piece, it's always, they're two of the same for me, learning to relax. And I see them as related to the lines.
Yeah.
So, I'd say earlier in my life, I almost never exercised my line to nine.
Ah.
To rest, to slow down, to let others go first. Like this was just didn't occur to me,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it's a fight. But
Mhm.
in the last few years, I've really been relishing being, observing, and being. I do think it'll be a lifelong journey, as the phrase goes,
Mhm.
to become a human being instead of a human doing, which is the phrase that's often attributed to threes.
Yes, yes.
And I'm sure other people are better than I am at it, but I think I work with a lot of threes now, and I think on one of your podcast episodes you may have referenced the fact that 3, 7, and 8 are very common types to find in business leadership in the West, and especially in the US.
Right.
I will have to say in my own practice, absolutely, they're the three who come up the most often,
Mhm.
because I believe, in the West, it's a privilege. Those styles tend to get privilege, and they all happen to also be attachment styles that are assertive, and so that makes sense, in the West. And
Mhm.
so I think my own journey as a three has been very helpful in supporting leaders who are threes
Mhm.
and leaders who have social dominant instinct.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's great because there are, like you say, there are a lot of them, and they need that. I think sometimes threes don't realize all the things that you just talked about realizing along the way of learning your three, not listening to your feelings, your body in the case of a self-preservation repressed three. But I want to ask a little bit more about your relationship with your emotions, because I think it's really, we often teach it's kind of a misperception that threes, quote unquote, aren't emotional, right? Yes, you may go years without crying, you may not be in touch with your emotions, but that's part of the survival strategy of doing, 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 and you can't do as much if you're feeling. And yet, when you do the work of pausing, like you're saying, of slowing down, of leaving space, they're right there, because threes are heart types, and this the center of the heart triad. Can you say a little bit more about what it's been like for you, or what your process was like around getting in touch with your emotions or learning to access them more and more?
Yes. First, I just want to say, I'm so glad you're bringing this up, because I think it is a huge misperception. for myself, and I notice this with my clients who are threes as well, we're a wellspring of emotions. I've my whole life.
Yeah.
I can read a room so easily.
Yes, and reading a room is a heart function, so I'm glad you mentioned that. It's your heart reading the room, not your head. Yeah,
It so reads the room and it can
yeah,
feel everything everyone's feeling
yeah.
and adjust to it and calibrate to it, which is that's the image, part of being in the image center, right? Image triad. But so for me, what would happen though is I have had all these feelings my whole life. I think my mother described me as a sensitive child. That's part of being a heart type. And of course, children, when you're young, uh, they're not editing so much, right? You learn how to do this later. So I think what happens with threes and what happened with me is in order to achieve things, which is how threes is the survival strategy for getting validation and being okay in the world, is to achieve things and to do things and be recognized for them. That becomes so all important to your self concept, to feeling okay in the world,
Right.
that you stuff the feelings down that might say, I don't want to do this, I want to do that, or I just want to rest, or I don't feel like that, or this hurts to do this. And eventually you just don't even know you're doing it. I remember so many times in my life being in a situation, work, for example, maybe I remember multiple times getting like screamed at, even with profanity at different times by a boss. And in the moment, being completely calm, completely cool,
Mhm,
and just the perfect expression of the way a leader should be. And then getting home and just feeling the anger, right? And I'm like, why did I, and I'm familiar with this phenomenon of not feeling it in the moment, but
mhm,
feeling it later and then when Enneagram helped me become aware of what that thing was. And I was like, oh, this is what that is.
mhm,
I've controlled it. I had all the feelings, but I controlled it, held it down. And then later in the day, out it comes when I'm by myself and I can
mhm,
process it and get myself. In the old days, it would be when I can get myself under control. Now,
mhm,
what I've been working on ever since, starting in therapy, is how do I express my feelings in the moment in a construct.
mhm,
So, uh, my husband is a four,
mhm,
social four. One of my dearest friends is a self preservation four. And what I observed, the difference between us, we have so much connection because we're heart types,
mhm.
is the two of them, if they're not feeling it, they're not doing
Mm.
it. And so, and I used to be frustrated by it. Now I admire it and I aspire to be like that, to
Yeah.
say, gosh, I just don't feel like doing that. So I'm not doing it. It's amazing. There's such an epiphany for me because I
Mhm,
was so used to thinking, well, it doesn't matter what I feel. You just have to do it. So just do it. In
mhm,
therapy, my therapist originally worked with me on getting a lot of it had to do with shame, which I think a lot of threes have struggled with. I remember one exercise he gave me. It was horrifying, but it was so valuable, which was I had to write down everything about myself that I was ashamed of, like physically, mentally, emotionally, everything on this big sheet. And I had to post it on my closet door. I saw it every time I opened the closet and my husband saw it. And there are these things that I'm ashamed of myself. I had to leave it there for like a month.
mhm,
And what ended up happening, which he knew, of course, is after I looked at it day after day after day, it didn't mean anything anymore. And I remember talking to him about it, and he said, oh, well, this is what happens when you open the closet door and you shine the light of day on what's in the closet. It's no longer dark anymore, and these things are no longer scary. So I think that's how I think about my emotions
mhm,
as a three, is it's about experiencing them little by little and teaching myself that I can regulate them in the moment in a healthy way, not extinguish them or stuff them down. Later, a couple of years ago, I also went to a therapist who practiced EMDR, a movement desensitization and reprogramming, which is for trauma
right.
and PTSD. And that was incredibly helpful because there were things that happened to me in my life that I had never processed
Mhm.
as a three, a social three who pressed them down. And two of there were a couple of things. One of them was literally when my dog was hit by a car when I was about 8.
Mm.
I remembered at the time my mother and my sister being hysterical. It happened like right in front of us. And I did not have any reaction at the time. I was mortified. It was my dog, and I was like so close to that dog. Well, I carried that all the way through
Mm.
to 58 years old. And when my dog here, it all came back to me.
Wow.
And and I was super traumatic. So she helped me process that. But then we also found all these other things. My husband's heart attack ended up being a very significant one. He had other serious health problems, was in the hospital, near death multiple times. And
Wow.
as a three, I always dutifully showed up and did all the things, all the supportive things that were necessary. And as a self-preservation repressed three, didn't process my own feelings, didn't sleep, all these other things. So I think, these types of somatic therapies like EMDR,
Mhm.
of course, be helpful to anybody with
Right.
any kind of trauma. But I wonder, I haven't seen any data on this, but I wonder if for threes, they might be particularly useful because threes have this for an entire lifetime, not expressing what they feel
Right.
and bottling it up. And so you've got a lot of traumatic things that have never been processed.
Yeah, and it's amazing that they don't go away. It's like these feelings, it's like they're reflections of deep experiences that you had that were real, that it's almost like they're waiting for you to honor them by your attention and by allowing them to be, and they're not just going to go away because we bottle them up, so I think that's a beautiful example of their all your feelings are still waiting to be felt, and because they're important.
Boy, that's true. And I think you should be angry about it, and think, go, leave me alone. I have so much stuff to do. And I'm discovering how much, well, when I sleep, I think one of the reasons I went to therapy is I was having panic attacks at night when I was sleeping, and I didn't know why. I
Mm.
couldn't figure it out. What it was, she and I figured out, I was sensing that my dog was getting ready to die.
Ah,
And then somewhere inside me, the 8-year-old kid's emotions that have never got
mm,
processed
mm.
were coming up and expressing that way. It's so
Wow,
fascinating.
it is.
So now when I'm working with clients, it's easier for me to spot some of these signs and occasionally then to refer them or recommend they go see a therapist in addition to coaching work.
Yeah, that's I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about the social three and the social instinct, because I think that's, you know, I never stop getting impressed and surprised by how much comes to us through understanding our dominant instinct. Of course, the whole instinctual sequence, you've already said some interesting things about being self preservation repressed. But can you tell us a little bit more about being a social dominant and what that's meant to you, and maybe a social three, if that makes sense?
Yes. I discovered in teaching Enneagram and using Enneagram as a tool with clients, really important for me to explain what the social instinct means because I find that people conflate social with sociable.
Mm,
And so they think if I'm social dominant, I am an extrovert, sociable, gregarious. And I find it doesn't mean that at all.
right.
I identify as an introvert. Many of my clients do, yet they're social dominant. So I always like to explain to them, kind of like from an evolutionary psychology perspective, it's really it's the instinct that relates to your relationship to others in a group and to power. And it's your awareness of the status of yourself and other individuals within the social group. And sometimes I give them like an example that I think about often for myself, which is okay for our hunter-gatherer ancestors. If one did not have good relations, with others in the group, what would happen? And most people can come up with the idea. They got fewer resources, they got less food, they got fewer or no mates. If it was really bad, they might get kicked out of the tribe and eaten by an animal. So I think like that's the origins of it. And then in today's world, it's sort of, metaphorical, but similar that in a business context, for example, it means really paying attention to power dynamics and status and image and how things get done through invisible networks rather than just through effort and process. And so social instinct folks really pay attention to these things. And I've noticed with my clients, those who are social repressed often are really challenged in figuring out the political dynamics within the organization because it's not something that they've naturally practiced because it's not in the forefront of their instinctual stacking for most of their life. And so it's something that we often have to work on becoming more aware of. And sometimes I even find that some of those clients are contemptuous of it, which I understand.
Mhm.
But then we have to work out, okay, well, is this the role that you want to have then? Because part of the reality of a human organization, whether it's a family or a corporation, is the social instinct and politics, which I don't think is bad. I think politics in a social group just is just referencing how individuals relate to one another and power dynamics, and every group of people has power dynamics, and so social people are just really attuned to what those are and how to use them,
Right.
hopefully for good.
Right. Yes, yeah, yeah. That's really, really beautiful example. It makes a lot of sense. And so tell us, I know that you had played a role in bringing the Enneagram to Neiman Marcus, where you worked for a while as. And so can you tell us a little bit about your position there and how you brought that in? But Uranio has something to say before we go there.
Yeah, maybe just before we move on to the professional applications, I would like to make a few comments, especially for our listeners. First, I enjoy listening to you very much, Eric, and thank you for your positively vulnerable sharing. And I just want to say that we've heard so many things that have to do with the growth path for a three and a social three and a social sexual self-press three. And I'm saying this because we usually, I mean, our listeners won't usually see many people, many threes with some of the stories you have, but this is merit for you. And so from things like having access to feelings and both allowing them to teach about you, remind you that a three is really someone in, the center of the heart triad, but also, allowing feelings to slow you down a little bit and being in touch with uncomfortable feelings that don't make you more popular. And then in therapy, seeing patterns and working on the instinctual sequence and shadows. I think you touched this theme, and then I think all of that. What I wonder is how the the challenges that you had in life may have helped. I suspect they have helped you to be in touch with all of that. And I could talk about your difficult boss or your husband's heart attack, but maybe the early knowing that you were a gay boy and then a gay man without a role model. That is very hard for a three, not to have any role model. And as such, being having being forced to be in touch with yourself and look inside and not outside. So I think that that may have been paradoxically pivotal for you to be more in touch with yourself. And sometimes we say that only when people have meaningful challenges in life they do self-development work. So I just want to make this comment so that people understand that it's not that you are not a three. You are a three in a big growth path, which makes me admire you a lot.
Mhm.
Thank you, Uranio. It's really kind, and I appreciate your reflections because I think that that's true. It's actually uh, one of my mindfulness rituals every day is that when my husband and I walk our dog, we've done this for like 20 years, we each relate to each other three things that about the day that we appreciated, and then we describe it in some detail.
Mm,
We started this years ago when I would be driving home from work because it was a reset for me after maybe a difficult day
mm,
to condition my mind that when I leave work, I don't focus on all the bad things that happen. I'm now going to focus on the good things. And I think in many of those appreciations, I have included painful incidents from the past, and including that boss who ended up being one of my best bosses. And I built a very powerful relationship with that person through my own growth work by changing how I approached rather than how he approached me. And so I think there's you know, as you often talk about, things that help us grow are rarely the easy things, the feathered nest stuff,
mhm,
the hard challenges. And I can definitely say that, but for these things that caused me to reach out and seek help from a therapist and help from a coach, perhaps I'd be plowing along on this path of just doing things and achieving things. And who knows what condition my body would be in, for example.
mhm.
Yeah, this makes sense, and thank you again.
Yeah, and I appreciate you, Uranio, talking, highlighting the difficulty it must have been to not have a role model as a gay man growing up, and also, I think for me it also really highlighted both how difficult that must have been to be growing up without a role model, because as a three, so much of your worth comes from how people see you, right? And having getting this sense from early on in life that there's something that people aren't going to like about me or isn't okay. um, and on the one hand, having that be so difficult being a three, but on the other hand, having a really good defensive armament against that, like I'm just going to look really good and I'm going to be good at everything and I'm going to do the hell out of everything, as a defense mechanism. But then I think your story also helps us see how that defense only works so long. And of course, we need to, if we're really going to be who we are and live our lives, we're going to need to reckon with that at some point, like the over dominance of the defense that on one hand probably kept you feeling safe and sort of okay in your childhood, but that eventually had to be seen and felt if you were going to be healthy, which it sounds like you have such a beautiful growth path in terms of the work that you've done and the way that you've really met these challenges head on.
I love that you pointed that out, B, because I do think it's an important part of coaching others using the Enneagram. And I find one of most, the first things to overcome with a client is the idea that what got them to where they are. And most of my clients, because they're business leaders,
Mhm.
are successful people
Right.
in the general understanding of it. So part of what we work on is understanding you've been successful, and perhaps you can be even more successful and happier and have a more enjoyable life while being successful if you can add other tools to your tool belt, which really is what the growth path integration can provide someone. And sometimes you got to find the path of least resistance into a client's world. And sometimes they're ready to do this work because they feel the need. It's something internally driven, and sometimes because they're feel like they're unsuccessful in some way.
Right.
And if that is the crack through which we could slip to get them to also pay attention to things that don't have to do with work,
Mhm.
then that's great. And that works, which kind of brings me to the creation of an in-house coaching practice at Neiman Marcus Group.
Yeah.
I worked with my team to create one back when I was at Gap. And it was okay, but I think it wasn't rigorous enough, and it did not it used a different personality typing instrument that was not as sophisticated or rigorous as the Enneagram as its foundation. When I came to Neiman's and known the value of coaching and thought, hey, there's a way that I want to go about this, because sometimes when you use just outside coaches, they all use their own approach. And I'm like, I want it to be Enneagram based and et cetera. So my team and I got became certified in coaching through Hudson Institute, and then certified in Enneagram and Team Enneagram, and built this practice and this approach
Mm.
to use with the business. And we integrated the Enneagram several ways. One, into existing development programs. We had a program for leaders called Leading with Love, for example. We had a program for individual contributors called Fashion Your Future, and the 6 to 12-month development programs. And the Enneagram coaching became foundational to those programs
Mm.
and instrumental in helping individuals develop, while they might be learning some concrete operating skills in those programs, they were also learning how to grow and develop through use of the Enneagram. And then we also used it in one-on-one leader coaching and team coaching quite extensively. And I think my boss, the CEO, even Marcus Group at the time, Bob on Ramdot, would say now that that practice, the use of the Enneagram, was a key component to the company's successful sale, successful monetization at a 9x multiple, which was a very good multiple at the time in luxury. And he himself used the Enneagram coaching practice
Mm.
throughout his tenure there with his own leadership team.
Wow.
And then we used it with other leadership teams. And what I found is it's powerful when a leader becomes self-aware and begins a growth path to become a better, more aware leader. It's exponentially more powerful when all the leaders on a team come together to do this. And how I would tie this into the discussion of the three and the social three is that several of the teams we worked with there, well as some of my other client teams now, are three teams. So when you use an assessment, a team assessment, they will type as a social three team
Mhm.
and have the characteristics of it. Even if the majority of them are not social threes, they've got a lot of that energy in their profile. And so certain behaviors I've discovered will tend to show up on the team. And so then certain interventions are helpful. So, for example, on one social three team, there was a lot of internal competitiveness, sure to you, because threes are going to compete. So if you don't provide if you're in a corporation, if you don't provide an outside target for that competition, maybe a competitor, and the environment is unsafe in some way, people will compete with each other for resources, for talent, for money, etc. So they can succeed. That's what threes are all about. So what I found on social three teams oftentimes is we had to work on becoming one team. And there's a concept from Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, called first team. And the idea is that most people will, by default, consider the team they lead directly, their direct report team, as their primary team or their first team. But that what he says is, to be successful in an organization, your first team needs to be your group of peers. So perhaps like the CEO and the C-suite team, that needs to be their first team, not each C-suite member's individual functional team. And when you create that first team, you create an interdependence, a social group of interdependence, where they're not competing against each other in silos. And I have found that's useful for the business teams, but particularly for three and social three oriented business teams in particular, and very different issues when the instinctual stacking is different. I work with another team now who's massively self-preservation dominant and
Mhm.
sexual repressed, including the leader. The leader of the team is probably the most self-preservation dominant SX repressed individual I've ever typed. Like the SX bar is like it's like this big.
Mhm.
And so how what was showing up on that team when I was working with them, they're doing the Enneagram work, was one, they were burned out from doing too many things. I was able to tie this back to the leaders of type 7. And lots of ideas. And so there are lots of things going into the system. But the other problem they had was with decision making. They had they had a difficult time. Sometimes the decisions would go from one meeting to the next, and they were not resolving them. And then outside of the meeting, people would go to the CEO to get things resolved, and that caused trust issues in the team. It turned out really the strongest diagnosis was that this very self-preservation dominant, sex repressed team didn't like the confrontation with each other. So they would do it if it was intellectual, but when things got emotional or a little heated, that dominant self-preservation instinct as a team kept them from pushing through and engaging. So they would go around the back and have a
Mm.
private conversation around the back. So what we ended up working on over time is techniques so that they could safely engage each other in a public setting and push through that
Mm.
difficulty, that discomfort that self-preservation dominant types can sometimes have with intensity.
Mm.
And I have found the reverse on SX teams. I have another team right now where the CEO is an SX dominant and the CFO is, and a bunch of the other team members are social and self-preservation dominant. And one of the issues is they he he's frustrated they don't tell him when there are problems. And what we've discovered is the intensity that emanates from the SX dominant leader
Mm.
intimidates the self-preservation and social
Mm.
dominant leader. So then we're working on what are safe ways for people to be able to tell what they need to tell the truth and feel comfortable doing so. So I think this is a way of relating, I think what I said earlier in an individual context, that in working with teams, working on the instinctual sequencing has been as impactful as working on the type for me.
Wow, that's so interesting, and I'm finding the same thing myself. And I think you're really, really right, and I appreciate these examples because they're so vivid and it makes so much sense. And it sounds like it's really the key. Like if you're just working at the level of type, you're not really capturing the full picture of what's happening in that team, and of course where their challenges come from. So I love that. One question I have is, as you've brought in the Enneagram so much into the programs that you've designed in house, but also in your consulting practice, do you find people are open to the Enneagram? Like is this something that they readily or easily accept and work with, or how do you bring it in a way that where they see the value of it and open up to it?
I may just be lucky, but I haven't had a single instance of anyone outright rejecting it. And if since you're asking if I reflect on why is that so, I do think that from when I was first introduced to the Enneagram to now, especially because of social media, there is it's in the zeitgeist. It
Right.
didn't used to be. It used to be this wonky thing on the side, and people used to get a little wigged out about about the Enneagram itself. Like some people
Diagram.
like a pentagram or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but because it's out and about,
Yeah.
I find that it's more familiar. I also think it depends on how you introduce it to people. And one of the things that I always tell clients from the get-go is that the Enneagram or your core type and your subtype are a box you put yourself into when you were a child in order to survive a hostile world you couldn't control. It's the Enneagram is not putting you in that box. You put yourself in the box. The
Yeah.
work of the Enneagram is to get out of the box.
Yeah.
And so, what we do together is to free you from that
Mhm.
being the only strategy you have available to you, to open you up to all of the other strategies you might use to be effective. And this is where I think it's so helpful to do this work in teams when you can,
Yeah.
because then I think it helps individuals actually see for example, using their lines when they see other people, like let's say it's a social three, and that three has a six or team. It's easier for her to see if she admires that six and some of her traits, the things that she brings to the team, why those could be useful strategies for her to think about and lean into,
Mhm.
for instance, and to learn from others and what the strengths are of their Enneagram type. So I I think it's been pretty easy for me. And even when someone resists their core type, what I found has been an unlock for me. I often find the issue is with the instinct.
Mhm.
And so, for example, I had a type seven CEO. She was very upset about being a seven because I think in her mind she thought of a seven as an SX7
Mhm. Mhm.
and serious, all these things. And what we figured out is, oh no, she's just very, very self-preservation dominant, SX repressed seven.
Mhm.
And by the time we'd worked through it, she's like, okay, that is me actually. And we talked about what comes up, and she realized, oh, actually, I'm strategic. I love the different ideas, and I'm actually interested in what every person on my team does, for example.
Mhm.
And I prefer to stay here and not necessarily go down deep into the details. She was getting tripped up and the instinct. And I think she had known some people who had been typed as a sexual seven,
Mhm.
and they were more the stereotype of the sexual seven,
Right, right.
always happy, everything's
Super
very optimistic,
positive,
everything's.
not looking at reality.
And
Yeah.
she said, that's just not me. And she's
Mhm.
right, it wasn't her. Because
Mhm.
that instinctual sequencing can matter so much depending on what's dominant and what's repressed and the degree to which those are true.
Right, right. The all importance of subtype and recognizing the differences, even among people of one type. And I do find that sometimes I've worked with, for instance, twos, someone who turns out to be a self preservation two, and they have like a social two mother in law who's not very developed and so is very controlling. And it's all about her, even though she's saying it's all about everyone else. And so it feels like, that can't be me, and well, that's not you exactly, although you may have some things in common.
Mm, so glad you say that because I think I've discovered very few instances recently of mistyping, perceived mistyping. And I think it's because of this, because it's about getting underneath the type, which is necessarily a very broad, general
Right.
category of behaviors. And there's so much more under the surface that comes up when you explore subtype. And I sometimes wonder if some people who thought they were mistyped really weren't mistyped. They just didn't understand their instinctual sequencing.
Right. 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 It makes a lot of sense. I was just gonna see if there's anything else we haven't asked about that you might want to share.
So maybe I can ask something, say a few things about work, and then we can go for this question, just for the sake of, concentrate in the same theme. So, Eric, I really like seeing your approach in business, and I see that throughout your life, you naturally changed your career. You progressed, leaving a certain organization or becoming an entrepreneur and more. And I'm used to seeing that as something that is way easier for a social dominant with self-pres repressed, but anyway, it's any self-pres repressed person. And I wonder if you see this relationship, and then I'm going to ask something else.
I thought about it that way before, but it's like an epiphany now that you're saying it, because it is true. I think I always thought of that as being part of being a three, being change agile.
Mhm.
But actually, but now that I know a number of self-preservation dominant threes, for example, I see that's not always the case.
Yes, yes,
They
because
tend to live in the same place a long time, and I've moved around a lot and all these things, and it all just sort of goes. So I do think there's definitely something to that. And certainly, here's what like, for me, I am one of those self-preservation repressed people who's left his phone in the Uber about 5 times, and I've left my iPad on the plane, and I don't know where my keys are. And I I associate that with not paying attention enough to like things. A phone these days is sort of an essential item, for example, for better or for worse. And it's a little bit like health or other aspects of well-being. What I've discovered for myself as a self-preservation repressed person is I have to ritualize self-care. And so that's how it happens. So I will ritualize exactly when and schedule when I meditate, and I will schedule my workouts and very meticulous about how I structure eating so that I can take care of myself as opposed to just discovering, gosh, I haven't worked out in days and I didn't eat today or whatever tends to happen with self-preservation repressed people. So I think sometimes whatever one's um, dominant instinct and repressed instinct probably requires in the growth path more structure to those areas because they don't come naturally.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. When it comes to career, I do see that that connection, and I did several studies on career patterns and the Enneagram in the past, and I observed a lot of people over decades. And what I see is that self-pres repressed people find it really easier to change career paths, but also change in general. Um, but also there is even a lack of assessment of the risks in those changes, and then there is something about, and I saw that in myself several times. And then as to threes, type three people, I think I see very different, if not opposite, tendencies in careers at times. So some threes leave their positions, jobs, or even organizations sort of easily, especially when they don't see as many challenges as before, while some other threes that are more attached to security, they stay, but having in mind becoming someone super, like remarkable in that organization and building a whole history in there, and also image oriented in this sense. So I think that it's not everybody that would do what you did.
Appreciate your reflections, Uranio, because I think there's one thing that has been most impactful in the last year or two for me around use of the Enneagram. It's really been deeply and truly discovering what the implications of instinct and subtype are. I think that I understood them maybe in a more mechanical way in the past. I didn't understand until really deeply working with clients at Neiman's and then in my own practice, how to use them to help people. And I think you just illustrated a great example of how the challenge as a leader who is, say, self-preservation dominant three in an organization might be very different from a self-preservation repressed three.
Yeah,
And perhaps the self-preservation repressed three really needs to work on putting down some roots and stabilizing things, and perhaps the other needs to be challenged
yeah.
to ways they can accept change and deal with the anxiety that comes with it, et cetera.
Yeah, and I really appreciated your explanation about something that is core for social dominance in the sensitivity for um, eh, power challenges, power dynamic challenges, way more than being sociable.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciated that too. So many times we people think, well, I can't be social because I don't love groups. I don't like to be in the middle of a group, a social group, but that's not what it is. And so I also really appreciated your accentuating the sensitivity to power dynamics because that's really important. I do have one question on that since we have you and you're so you understand so deeply these things. I want to ask a little, what's it like to have had been in a long-term marriage with someone who's also social, and how do you see your kind of instinct playing out with your husband?
Great question. I hadn't thought about before. I think it's one of the reasons we've been together for 36 years.
Mm,
And I've noticed that people of the same instinct dominance tend to have an affinity oftentimes. There's something that attracts you. At the same time, where I think that may have been challenging is he's also self-preservation repressed. And so I think that paying enough attention to issues of stability and structure, those sorts of things can at times be a challenge
mhm,
for us. I think also earlier in our life, and obviously we're both gay too, and this is an interesting study of social instinct. There was so much focus on status and where you fit in the group, and out of necessity,
mhm,
I think when we first got together, we met in 1989, and it was at the height of the AIDS epidemic.
mhm,
And not only is that just very challenging, but the stigma associated with being a same-sex couple
mhm,
amplified dramatically during those years because people were so afraid
mhm,
of that disease and it was identified with the gay community. So I think in the early years of our relationship, it was before we both went to therapy, worked on ourselves. It was a real negative. I think we both had this heightened sensitivity at all times to how people viewed us. And the therapy work for both of us really was getting more in touch with what we felt. As a four, he was much better at expressing his feelings
mhm, mhm,
than I was. But there still was this shadow the whole time. Even if he would express his feelings that I wouldn't, he would still really pay attention to what people thought. So if we went to a party, we would come back and he'd think, I don't think that person likes me. I don't think that person likes me. I don't think that person liked me.
mhm,
And uh, that's gone now
mhm,
for the most part after many years of work.
mhm,
So I think it's a good illustration that even if I usually tell clients, your personality is your personality, like it was developed early in life, you're going to have it, but you can adapt. You can become more flexible and more agile. The goal I always think is to, to work towards being difficult or impossible to type because you're so agile that you are flexibly using all of the energies available to you within the Enneagram to respond in a healthy and effective way to life. So sure, I have a long way to go, but I think I'm grateful that to the Enneagram, and I will say to both of you, because I've listened to every one of your podcasts since you first started it. And it's been a very important part of my journey, what of understanding myself first, but then also, so thank you for that.
mhm. Thank you so Thank you. I did think of one more question I wanted to ask you about your decision to bring the Enneagram into the coaching programs that you brought into the companies that you were working at. Um, why did you think that, like, why Enneagram based coaching? Because it sounds like, especially at Neiman Marcus, you were very intentional about like the coaching would include that. Why did you make that decision? Why did you think that was such an important piece?
when back when I was at Gap and then at Davita, I had the occasion to hire a coach not only to work with me, but with my leadership team over an extended period of time, team coaching. And the coaches used the Enneagram.
Mm.
And I saw the power then. I saw how the individuals on my team and the team itself transformed in its effectiveness through the coaching. And it was very obvious to me that the Enneagram was key to that. For years, I've been certified in DISC, for example, and also used Myers-Briggs in previous organizations, and they were useful. But nothing, it could not compare to the depth and the sophistication of what the Enneagram could offer. And yet I found it's almost miraculous. Despite how complex and sophisticated the Enneagram is, you can never stop learning about it.
Mhm.
People readily understand it. It just as easily as they can understand DISC and just get it. It starts to become a vocabulary and a language for the team to communicate with one another about what they need.
Mm.
The biggest benefit on a team
Mm.
that it provides a depersonalized, safe way to have conversations that matter
Mm.
about your relationships and how it affects outcomes in work. And that is just critical. Tried many other techniques over the years. There are so many books written about this, about how to get teams to have difficult conversations, crucial conversations, hard conversations. I've found the Enneagram is the best tool for that,
Mm.
in my judgment.
Mm. Beautiful. Thank you. Anything else that you want to share with our audience that we may not have asked about or we haven't gotten to?
You've been so thorough, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to share with you. I've admired you for years, both of you, and learned so much from you. And so the opportunity to have this conversation means a lot to me. And thank you.
Mm. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as well, and so appreciate you sharing and opening up. You've touched on so many different important aspects of the Enneagram and growth work. So thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that all our listeners learned a lot today with your interview, and I learned a lot, Jen.
Okay,
Thank you both.
thank you. Okay, so that does it for this episode of the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. Join us again next time where we talk about all things Enneagram.
When I went to the retreat in October, before that, I had been mistyped. And so it became clear to me during that retreat that I was a 9 and not a 6 that I had originally thought. And so when I got back in October, I did a lot of study and learning about the 9s and realized indeed I was a 9. So then I wanted to take the 9, the course on the 9s, right, just to get a better, more in-depth information about it. And yeah, so that was one of my primary reasons actually. It's actually quite disconcerting because I had been doing work with the Enneagram for a number of years, right, and had come from that idea. So it was also hard for me to give up the idea that I was at the head center. I think what became evident to me as we got more and more into the workshops was how much I felt at home within the group. And I don't think I was alone in that. I'll speak for myself, of course, but it became a place where, and of course, it reinforced the idea for me that I was a 9, right? So that was part of it, but it felt very comfortable being within that group, even though it was online. It felt very comfortable being in that setting, I'm going to say, digital, whatever, online setting, however you want to frame it. So I think that was a really big piece for me, how I kind of felt, right, from a felt sense. But also just in terms of what I learned was particularly about the about sloth and about indolence. Like those are the two pieces, right, for nines, and that was really helpful just in terms of keeping, the Uranio and B kept going kind of back to that sort of ideas around that, and so that piece was helpful. And yeah, and I sort of kept that with me, over time, right? So yeah, and then they even I think the other this is the other piece that I really like was they showed videos of each subtype of the nines. So videos as in people, whoever it might be, the videos they showed, right? So that was really a good piece for me, right?
Mm.
Because I'm more of a visual learner. And that really hit home for me.